Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly O'Horo, and this is Adaptable Behavior Explained. Hi there. Thank you so much for tuning in today to Adaptable Behavior Explained. I'm your host, Kelly O'Horo, and today we're going to talk about something that a lot of people are ashamed to bring up. But this is the topic of sexless marriage. This isn't how it starts usually in our marriages, but it can evolve into this. And so we're going to talk about understanding a sexless marriage, unlearning the things that turned our intimacy into that, and how to reconnect. And so I hope that you find this interesting. I know that in my demographic, this is a conversation that happens more often than when I was younger, because as our bodies change and our stress compounds and our lives just get super busy, we tend to deprioritize intimacy. And it's so important that we continue that in our relationships, because if we don't, other problems end up happening. So today we're going to talk about this because many couples experience it, but very few talk about it out loud. And that is the concept of a sexless marriage. This isn't about blame. It's not about pressure. And it's definitely not about like what's wrong with you if you're in a relationship like that. It's about understanding what changes over time, biologically, emotionally, relationally, and how education and curiosity and ultimately compassion can shift the trajectory that may feel lonely or discouraging right now. So if this is going on in your life, stay tuned here. So if sex has become rare, tense, confusing, or maybe even non-existent in your relationship, especially in midlife, this episode is for you, and you're definitely not alone. So what do we mean by the term sexless marriage? Well, clinically, a sexless marriage is defined as having sex fewer than 10 times a year. But numbers alone don't tell the whole story. Some couples feel deeply distressed with little sex. Others feel content. The issue isn't frequency, it's disconnection, mismatch, or unspoken pain. Many couples don't stop having sex because they don't care. They stop because sex stopped working the way that it used to, because bodies change, because the libido or the desire changes because of hormone changes, or because sex became associated with pressure or shame or failure. And this can happen because of when people are trying to have children and they have infertility issues. This can happen because of an injury or accidents or illness. Lots of things can contribute to this becoming part of the marriage. And this is especially true for women in midlife because there's such profound shifts that require re-education, not resignation. And so I did do a podcast on perimenopause. And so we'll go ahead and include that in the description below, because that can be a pretty big factor for middle age change in sexual frequency. So now we're going to just teach you what you may not know. So it's about learning about the body changes, because when the body changes, the map must change. And one of the most overlooked reasons for sexless marriage is this, that we expect our bodies to respond the same way they did when we were 25, using the same instructions. And perimenopause, menopause, hormonal shifts in both men and women, medications, stress, and our life load all change throughout our lives. It affects lubrication. It affects the arousal timing. It affects sensitivity, what felt good, what doesn't feel good. It affects desire patterns. And what feels good and what doesn't changes. It doesn't just change over the time of our life, it changes through the cycle. And a lot of people don't talk about that. And this isn't dysfunction, it's biology. So re-educating means learning a new language of arousal rather than thinking that something's broken or that it doesn't work. For many women, desire becomes responsive, not spontaneous, meaning desire follows safety, connection, and stimulation, not the other way around. When we were younger, maybe we didn't need the emotional closeness the way that we do as we age. So if you're waiting to want sex first, you may wait forever. So something to think about is how women orgasm and the data that we were never taught impacts the way we see our relationships and namely sex. So we're going to talk about some statistics, because education reduces shame. When we know more, we can understand it with more compassion. So here's some numbers for you. Only about 65% of women consistently orgasm during partnered sex, compared to over 90% for men. Most women require 20 to 40 minutes of arousal to reach climax. And the majority of women do not orgasm from penetration alone. So this isn't personal failure. It's just an anatomical reality. The clitoris has over 8,000 nerve endings, most of which are internal. Yet many women and their partners don't know this, or were not taught that, or how it works. So this is where I like the book Becoming Cliterate by Lori Mintz. It's not graphic, it's educational, it's empowering, and it's really normalizing. I have a friend that I was just talking to last week who shared a lot of the things that she learned from that book, and I think it's outstanding. Because understanding your body is not indulgent, it's foundational. And depending on the cultures, religious background, or family grew up in, maybe none of this stuff was talked about, and learning your body was not encouraged. So we really have to start with learning. And language matters. Knowing the body reduces shame. We can't advocate for what we don't know. We can't talk about what we need or want when we aren't sure ourselves. Many women were raised without accurate terminology, like vulva versus vagina, or clitoris, or the clitoral hood, or the labia. Pelvic floor are words that we've never heard about as we grow up for most of us. And arousal versus desire. These are different. So when the language is missing, there can be shame that fills in the gap. And so we've got to learn the correct terms so that we have a common language with our relationship. It improves our communication with our partners. It improves our medical care when we talk about what we're experiencing. And then ultimately it'll improve our sexual satisfaction, because knowledge is not unsexy. Silence is unsexy. And so we've got to be able to talk about it. Now we're going to talk about the cycle, the menstrual cycle in women, because this matters. And a lot of people, namely men, do not understand that women's sexual responsiveness changes across the menstrual cycle, across perimenopause, across stress levels, and sleep quality impacts the way we respond sexually. Emotional safety is really critical to arousal. And so what feels good one week in a cycle may feel irritating or neutral the next. Positions might need to be different. Touch might need to be harder or softer or in different locations, because during our cycle, our bodies literally change and shift. And so many of us don't know that. Why did I like that last week? And this week, I'm not into it. But I have to say that, and it can't be perceived as rejection by our partners, because it's just the anatomy and it's not anything that is our fault. Some people feel more desire and more arousal mid-cycle. Others prefer closeness without penetration during like the luteal phases. And so it's really important for us to know our cycles and what we like or experience. Now, during perimenopause, stimulation may need to be slower, longer, or different to be more effective. And that can be a bad combination when we're tired as we age and we don't have the same energy levels that we once did. Effective sex is adaptive. It's not routine. So this is where being creative, being patient, and trying new things is really important. Midlife sex often improves when couples stop trying to recreate the things that we did in the past, instead of responding to the body presently as it is and honoring the changes that have taken place as they are now. I think that something that needs to be discussed that's pretty important is the history of how we learned some of the things that we learned, namely related to religion or shame, or even the purpose of sex in the first place. Now, if you grew up in a family or a home where the body was shamed, where understanding your body was not encouraged, you're not alone. Many of us were raised with teachings that framed sex is that it's for reproduction only, or if you have sex, you will absolutely always end up with a disease or a baby. For marital duty, these are the shoulds and supposed to's. A good wife or a good husband always pleases their partner. Or that it's just for male satisfaction and that women don't need to have a good experience with it, depending on how you were taught as a child. Or maybe you were taught that it's something that's dangerous or sinful or shameful. And all of those messages can really negatively impact how we think about sex and connection. Even in loving religious homes, pleasure might have been absent from the conversation, when in fact we're hardwired for things to feel good. In fact, when I talk to patients about, sex and like, let's say they're talking about masturbation or something related to one of their kids finding out, these sorts of things, we just talk about that our bodies are made to feel good and that it's normal to be curious about that. And then we just talk about time and place and appropriateness of that. But those are the kinds of messages that help people to develop into adults that don't associate shame with all of these factors. Because these messages don't disappear when we become adults. They live in our nervous system and they become part of how we're wired and how we think about things. So unlearning those things doesn't mean rejecting values. It just means separating morality from biology. It means separating worth from desire, and separating safety from silence, because a healthy sexual relationship isn't indulgent, it's relational. And we can have it if we learn about these things and we become brave enough to talk about it. So let's talk a little bit about why sex often stops in midlife. Some of the common contributors are perimenopause and menopause. Hormonal shifts like estrogen and testosterone and cortisol levels really impact the way we interact sexually in later or midlife. Fatigue and burnout are really critical factors. If I don't have enough energy to even get up, how can I imagine going at it for 20 or 40 minutes? Sometimes our caregiving roles. I can remember that after I had my youngest son and I was like breastfeeding and he always needed something and he was always touching me, I didn't really want additional touch. I felt like a factory. And so, your caregiving roles can really drastically impact your desire for more touch. Resentment or emotional disconnection can play a major factor, and it can affect our body. I've worked with people where resentment was directly connected to things like yeast infections or UTIs, which will physiologically push away our partners. And people don't understand how those emotional connections or unresolved distress in relationship will impact our bodies. Some people have pain with sex because of something that's physically going on. And so these require you to get these things checked out and then be able to communicate what does work and what isn't helpful. There's also tremendous pressure to perform. This happens for men more than women because, women don't have to be actively working for us to perform, intercourse. Whereas men, they have to have something functionally working to have erection for them to be able to perform. And so with that can create a lot of pressure and a lot of stress and anxiety. And then that becomes paired up with failure. And so this is really overwhelming for people. And I don't want to sign up to go try again when I feel like I'm failing. And so these are all things to be really thoughtful and sensitive about. The other thing that can happen is a loss of curiosity. Not wanting to try new things as we age and not wanting to be open to keeping things fresh. But none of these things mean that a relationship is doomed or that your relationship or your marriage needs to remain sexless. They mean that support and adaptation are required because sex doesn't die from age. It dies from neglect. It dies from shame and mostly from misunderstanding. So let's talk about things that can help because it's not all doom and gloom. And change begins when we take action. So we first know about it and then we take action. So we want to shift from a goal of having sex to building safety and pleasure. That is going to require slowing down arousal because that's not a switch, it's a process. We want to expand our definition and sex touch to closeness, sensuality, hugging, touching, curiosity. All of these things count if you want to expand your definition of sex touch because all kinds of other things can be really mutually satisfying. Learn together, reading books together, going to Barnes and Noble and grabbing something off of the shelf like in the old days when everything wasn't right on our phone, and talk about these things together because learning normalizes our experience and then we're not alone with it, which also helps to unshame us. We need to address pain, hormones, pelvic floor issues, and there's even things called pelvic floor therapy and medical consults and education that can help for these topics because there is help. And then talking about it, again, without judgment, without blame, being curious and not accusatory, no matter if you're the man or the woman, is really important so that we can get to the bottom of what's happening and we can be open and curious and resilient to change and adaptation as things in our relationship changes. If you're in a sexless marriage, I want you to hear this. You're not broken. Your body is not betraying you. And it's not too late. It can absolutely change. Midlife can be a doorway, not an ending. As long as education replaces shame and curiosity replaces pressure, then things can turn around. Sex doesn't need to look like what it used to. It needs to be effective for who you are now, and it needs to be modified and adapted and flexible for how you've evolved in both your physicality and in your relationship. So thank you so much for listening today. Hopefully you found this helpful, and hopefully you find some benefit in this if you decided to listen. And if you have thoughts or comments, please share them with our viewers, because maybe we can work together on this topic and share ideas that have been beneficial for you if this is something you've struggled with in your relationship. If you found it useful, please subscribe to the channel and give us a like and a share so that we can improve reach to other viewers. And until we meet again, don't forget to lead with love. It'll never steer you wrong.